What happens to a story when it's no longer told? What becomes of a name when it's spoken once in Scripture and then lost to silence? In the great sweeping pages of the Bible, there are many names. Some shine brightly, repeated and remembered, while others flicker for a moment and then disappear. One such name is Enoch, the son of Cain. We hear of him only once, tucked inside a short verse, almost like a whisper. But what if his story wasn't truly lost? What if there was more, buried, forgotten, or even erased? And more importantly, why? Why would a story possibly tied to him, like the Book of Enoch, be removed or hidden from the Bible we know today? These are not just questions for scholars. They are questions for anyone who has ever wondered about the voices that history left behind. Today, we begin a sacred and quiet journey. We are not here to argue, but to wonder. We are not here to tear down, but to uncover, softly, like unwrapping an old scroll in a candle-lit room. Together, we will explore one of the most puzzling and powerful mysteries in early biblical texts, the Book of Enoch, tied to Cain's son. Who was this Enoch? What did he write? And why would people want this book forgotten? Why is it that some stories make it into the Bible and others, strange, wild, and unsettling, do not? Was it because they weren't true? Or because they were too true? These are the questions we'll gently explore, like walking through an ancient garden where every stone has a secret underneath. So, let's begin with open hearts and curious minds. In the book of Genesis, we read about Cain, the first son of Adam and Eve. After he killed his brother Abel, God marked him and sent him away. But even in exile, Cain built a city, and he named it after his son, Enoch. This is the first mention of a man named Enoch in the Bible, but this is not the Enoch who was taken by God. This Enoch was the son of Cain, a man born under the shadow of a curse. Many people confuse him with the later Enoch, the descendant of Seth, who walked with God. But they were two different men. The question we need to ask is, what kind of life did Cain's son Enoch live? And what kind of wisdom or writings might have come from him? Could a man born from the cursed line of Cain carry hidden knowledge buried deep in the sands of time? Ancient Jewish traditions, and even some early Christian ones, hint that there were many stories passed down from the line of Cain that didn't make it into the final Bible. Could it be that the Book of Enoch, at least one version, was tied to the son of Cain? What would such a book say? Would it be a warning, a revelation, or something too strange for the early church to handle? Some ancient scrolls suggest that the knowledge of the stars, metalwork, and even music came from Cain's descendants. Does that sound like simple survival, or something more advanced? Was Enoch, Cain's son, one of the first thinkers, dreamers, or even prophets of the ancient world? Could the Book of Enoch hold secrets about how early mankind learned forbidden things? Let's pause here and think. If you were building a city in the wilderness, like Cain did, wouldn't you pass on your skills to your children? Maybe that's what happened. And maybe Enoch, growing up in this strange new world, recorded visions, teachings, or histories that others didn't understand. If those writings survived even in pieces, could they have been collected into what we now call the Book of Enoch? Could this book be a puzzle made from many voices, including Cain's bloodline? If that's true, then perhaps it wasn't only left out of the Bible because it was false, but because it was too difficult to explain, or too uncomfortable to accept. The Book of Enoch as we know it today is often connected to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. That Enoch is described as righteous, walking closely with God. But some scholars believe that parts of the book may be even older, drawn from older traditions. What if some of those traditions came from Cain's line? Could we be looking at two stories woven together, one of light and one of shadow, one of holy visions and one of ancient forbidden knowledge? These ideas challenge what we think we know. But isn't that the nature of mystery? to invite us deeper. Let's talk about content. The Book of Enoch tells stories of angels who left heaven to marry human women, creating giants called Nephilim. It talks about the Watchers, powerful beings who taught humanity things like weapon making, astrology, and sorcery. Why would such stories be dangerous? Because they change the way we see the world. If these stories were known in ancient times and tied to Cain's bloodline, they would make people ask hard questions. Who really gave humanity knowledge? Was it God alone or something else? If Enoch, son of Cain, wrote about these things, would people in power want those writings hidden? Many church fathers and early theologians debated over the Book of Enoch. Some accepted it, some rejected it, but most agreed it was ancient and strange. One reason it may have been excluded from the Bible is because of its content. It paints a picture of a spiritual world filled with war, rebellion, and secret knowledge. Does that sound like something Cain's son might have known? A family that carried the weight of a curse might have seen the world in a darker way. Maybe their stories weren't just sad. They were filled with insight, wisdom, and warnings that people weren't ready to hear. Now let's go back to Cain. After he killed his brother, God didn't destroy him. Instead, he mocked him for protection. Isn't that strange? Why protect a murderer? Unless his line still had a role to play. Maybe, just maybe, there was something redemptive buried within Cain's bloodline. Maybe Enoch, his son, was part of that. Maybe he wasn't cursed, but chosen in a different way. Could the Book of Enoch, if it came from him, be a cry from the margins of biblical history? A voice not of the chosen line, but still chosen in its own way? This opens up big questions. If we believe only one line was blessed, Seth's, do we ignore all other voices? The Bible doesn't always give us full stories of every person. Sometimes people appear and vanish in a few verses. But they lived, they felt, they dreamed. Maybe Enoch, son of Cain, dreamed too. Maybe he looked at the stars, wrote things down, and tried to understand a world that had changed forever after his father's sin. Maybe his writings weren't rejected because they were evil, but because they were too human, too real. Now think of this. What if you were Enoch, the son of a man everyone feared? What kind of questions would live inside your heart? Would you wonder why your family was marked? Would you ask why your father had to carry such shame? Maybe Enoch asked questions no one wanted to answer. Maybe he searched for God in his own way, not through temples or sacrifices, but through writing, watching the stars, listening to the earth. It's possible that his search led him to visions, and if he wrote them down, maybe those writings became a part of what we now call the Book of Enoch. If so, then his voice still speaks, even if it was once silenced. Let's look at history. The Book of Enoch was not completely lost. It was preserved in Ethiopia, where it remained part of the church's tradition. Why there? Why not in Rome or Jerusalem? Some believe that those who preserved it were more open to mystery, less afraid of stories that didn't fit neatly into doctrine. The Ethiopian church saw the value in this strange, poetic, and powerful book. Could it be that they understood its connection to both Enochs, the righteous one and the forgotten one? Could it be that in some ancient way, the book carried voices from both light and shadow? We must be gentle here. We are not trying to rewrite the Bible or claim hidden truths that replace what is holy. But we are asking, what if there are parts of the story that were buried? What if the journey of humanity is even deeper than we thought? What if Enoch, son of Cain, was a man who lived between sorrow and discovery, a man who watched the consequences of his father's choices but tried to carve a new path? If his writings held anything sacred, maybe they were not erased because they were lies, but because they were uncomfortable truths. The Bible often leaves room for mystery. It doesn't tell us everything. It tells us what we need, but it also leaves us wondering. and that wonder is holy. The Book of Enoch, especially if parts come from Cain's line, pushes us to imagine a world where spiritual forces walked among us, where knowledge had a cost, and where even those marked by God were not abandoned. Could it be that God, in His mercy, still spoke to Enoch? Not the one who walked with God, but the one born from Cain's line? Could it be that God doesn't just speak to the righteous, but also to the broken? Some ancient traditions speak of Enoch as a scribe of righteousness. But what if there was another Enoch, a forgotten one, who was also a scribe? Not of righteousness maybe, but of survival. A recorder of what it means to live under a curse and still reach toward heaven. This is not about glorifying Cain's line. It's about listening to voices that history forgot, voices that might help us understand our own brokenness, our own searching. Maybe Enoch, son of Cain, wrote so that others would know they are not alone in their questions. Let's go deeper. The Book of Enoch speaks of judgment, of the heavens shaking, of the end times, but it also speaks of hope that justice will return and that the righteous will shine like the stars. If this came from the line of Cain, then it means that even in the darkest family tree, there was hope. Isn't that the heart of the Bible? That even those who fall can be restored? That no line is too far gone for light to break through? Maybe this is why some feared the Book of Enoch, because it didn't fit their neat boxes. It said, even the broken can dream. So why was the Book of Enoch erased from most Bibles? That's the question, isn't it? Was it too mystical? Too wild? Did it threaten the neatness of church structures? Maybe. Or maybe it wasn't erased, but simply hidden for a time, waiting for us to be ready to listen, ready to wonder, ready to walk through the questions without needing all the answers. Maybe this book isn't about having proof. Maybe it's about having permission to wonder about what's been lost. The story of Enoch, son of Cain, is not just about him. It's about every forgotten person, every story that didn't get told, every voice that was cut out of the picture. If his writings did survive, they would be a mirror for us today, reminding us that history is bigger than we think, that God's plan has layers, that the kingdom isn't just made of perfect people, but also of those who carry burdens and still hope. Cain's story began with jealousy and ended with exile. But Enoch's story, his son, might have been different. Maybe he didn't carry hate. Maybe he carried longing. Maybe he asked questions like, why did my father do that? Or can I be different? If the Book of Enoch contains his heart, then maybe it carries not only prophecy but pain. And sometimes pain is what makes truth shine brighter. Sometimes the ones on the outside see the clearest. Let's not forget the structure of the Bible itself. It was chosen by councils, debated by scholars, and shaped over centuries. Not everything was included. Some books were set aside, not always because they were false, but because they were hard. Maybe the Book of Enoch was one of those, a book too early for its time, a book that speaks to the restless soul, a book that says, you are not alone in your questions. Isn't that powerful? We return again to the image of Cain, marked, exiled, wandering, but even in that state he built. He named, he gave life to Enoch, and from Enoch's life, stories may have been born. The Book of Enoch might be one of those stories. If so, then it is not just a book of angels and giants, but a book of human ache, a book of what it means to be outside the garden and still searching for God. There is something sacred in the silence, in the stories we weren't told, in the names that appear once and then vanish. The Bible is full of them, and sometimes, when we lean in, we can hear their whispers. Maybe the Book of Enoch is one of those whispers, telling us that knowledge isn't just for the chosen, but for all who seek, and that even the son of a murderer might hold a candle in the dark. So what do we do with this? We don't throw away what we know, but we open our hearts to wonder. We hold tight to Scripture, and also hold space for the sacred unknown. The Book of Enoch, especially if tied to Cain's son, asks us to be brave enough to ask deeper questions, to read between the lines, to imagine that God's voice might have echoed in places we didn't expect. Isn't that beautiful? In the end, the story of Enoch, son of Cain, may never be fully known. His book may remain partly hidden, partly lost. But what we do know is this: every name in the Bible, even those forgotten, matters. Every voice has a place, and every soul, no matter its shadow, can reach for the light. Maybe that's the greatest message of all, that even in the lines we skip over, even in the stories that were erased, God still speaks, softly, like a whisper from the past, waiting for us to listen.